British Vogue recently unveiled its very first Best Dressed ranking, and at first glance, it appeared understated. No dramatic rollout, no controversy-driven headlines, just a list. But beneath that calm exterior, a clear message was delivered with surgical precision. At the very top sat the Princess of Wales. No explanation was required, no justification was offered. Her placement felt less like a decision and more like a conclusion that had already been reached long ago. Composed, assured, and effortlessly present, she embodied something Vogue values deeply but rarely spells out: authority that doesn't ask for permission. Yet the moment that truly caught attention didn't happen at the top of the list. It came shortly after, when British Vogue released a second feature spotlighting 55 individuals shaping modern style and culture. Actors, musicians, designers, cultural architects, each person carefully framed, each given a clear narrative role. The list was expansive, inclusive, deliberate. And one name many assumed would be there simply wasn't: Meghan Markle. No ranking, no sidebar mention, no commentary, just absence. In media spaces like Vogue, omission is never accidental. When a publication that thrives on symbolism chooses silence, it's not an oversight, it's a signal. Because in fashion and cultural power circles, being ignored carries far more weight than being criticized. Criticism invites debate, silence closes the conversation. What's important to understand is that this moment was never about clothing. Vogue made that clear through its editorial framing. This wasn't a celebration of outfits, trends, or seasonal looks. It was an examination of presence, of influence, of individuals who shape culture without appearing to chase it. In that world, style is not volume, it's control, it's restraint, it's knowing when not to speak. The list read less like fashion journalism and more like a blueprint of relevance. Who still holds trust? Who moves markets quietly? Who can wear something once and change its trajectory without explaining why? When you view it through that lens, the structure becomes obvious. Catherine wasn't just included, she was elevated. Vogue didn't describe her as fashionable, they described her as enduring, an influence not tied to cycles or trends, but to continuity. They placed her among figures whose relevance didn't need refreshing because it had already been absorbed into the culture itself. The praise wasn't flashy, it focused on her consistency, her long-standing commitment to British designers, her preference for re-wearing and archival pieces, and her uncanny ability to revive or redefine brands with minimal exposure. No reinvention arcs, no personal branding campaigns, just steady alignment with institutions that reward patience. And then came the line that mattered most to industry insiders: her influence is expected to grow. That wasn't poetic language, it was economic forecasting. As Catherine moves closer to roles that carry formal authority, such as granting royal warrants, her presence becomes more than symbolic, it becomes structural. Her choices don't just influence taste, they influence trade, manufacturing, and long-term brand positioning. Vogue understands this ecosystem intimately. They don't elevate individuals based on likability, they elevate those who stabilize systems. That's what makes her valuable. Equally important is what she avoids: no public disputes, no narrative corrections, no constant visibility. From an institutional perspective, that restraint builds trust, and trust is the most valuable currency in fashion, media, and finance alike. Now contrast that with the second list. 55 names, every one of them there for a reason, some for originality, some for consistency, some for cultural disruption, some for longevity. The list wasn't about perfection, it was about definition. Each individual had a clear identity within the ecosystem, And again, Meghan was absent. This wasn't about memory loss. Vogue doesn't forget globally recognized figures. This was about uncertainty, about not seeing a sustainable role that aligned with their values of distance, mystique, and editorial authority. In elite cultural spaces, inclusion means more than relevance. It means clarity. Who are you now? What do you represent? What do you contribute that will still matter 5 years from now? Vogue didn't explain her absence, because explanation would have granted attention. Instead, they chose neutrality, the most powerful response of all. In that silence was an unspoken conclusion. Whatever Meghan currently represents, it no longer aligns with the version of influence Vogue is committed to protecting. And that realization is where this story stops being emotional and starts becoming structural. To understand why this moment matters, you have to follow the money and the access. Catherine's placement at the top of Vogue's list wasn't ceremonial, it was transactional in the most understated way. The so-called Kate effect isn't a compliment, it's a measurable phenomenon. Items she wears sell out, designers experience immediate demand spikes, markets respond, entire supply chains feel the impact. Vogue doesn't speculate on this, they track it. From their perspective, Catherine represents reliability, a figure whose presence enhances brands without destabilizing them. She doesn't require narrative management, she doesn't demand framing, she simply exists within systems that already function smoothly. That stability is priceless. Now return to Meghan's absence and what followed behind the scenes. According to industry sources, she didn't wait passively for Vogue's attention, she initiated contact. But it wasn't a traditional editorial proposal, it came with conditions: prominent placement, extensive control over imagery, approval over quotes, and authority over the narrative direction. In other words, it wasn't collaboration, it was command. That's where the relationship broke down. Vogue works with powerful women constantly, but there's a rule they rarely bend. Editorial control remains with the publication. Even the most iconic figures don't dictate the story, because Vogue isn't a reputation repair service, it's a curator of cultural hierarchy. When faced with a figure whose public image had become increasingly polarizing and who sought control rather than trust, the response was predictable. Not dramatic, not public, simply closed. In high-level media, rejection doesn't arrive with headlines, it arrives as distance. There was a time when Meghan carried intrigue, newness, uncertainty, that sense of not fully knowing what came next. But mystique is fragile. Once it's replaced with overexposure, it's nearly impossible to recover. Visibility isn't always power, sometimes it's erosion. Repeated messaging, carefully managed appearances, and overt narrative steering gradually strip away spontaneity, and fashion, perhaps more than any other industry, thrives on what remains unsaid. Vogue values pause, space, the ability for an image to breathe. Somewhere along the way, Meghan's public presence became too explained, too intentional, too visible. Each appearance felt like a statement rather than a moment, and fashion doesn't reward effort that announces itself. That's where the post-royal reality became clear. Leaving the institution promised freedom, reinvention, autonomy, and while those things did arrive, something else disappeared with them: embedded authority. Inside the royal framework, influence is inherited, reinforced, and protected. Outside it, influence must be negotiated repeatedly. Projects launched with enormous anticipation, but struggled to maintain momentum. Relationships cooled, invitations slowed, support became conditional. The safety net of institutional alignment was gone. The uncomfortable truth is this: much of Meghan's former influence was inseparable from proximity to the crown. Once that proximity ended, every move required greater effort for diminishing returns. Freedom came, but so did isolation, and in industries built on continuity, isolation is risky. This is why Vogue's silence matters. Institutions don't chase attention, they preserve favor. Attention is loud and temporary. Favor is quiet and enduring. Catherine's influence grows because it aligns with systems that value patience and predictability. Meghan's challenge isn't ambition, it's positioning. When conflict replaces alignment, attention may follow, but institutional support does not. And without institutional support, doors don't close dramatically, they simply stop opening. This was never about fashion, it was about two approaches to power. One path embraced restraint, timing, and trust. It allowed influence to accumulate naturally. The other pushed forward, demanded space, sought control, and discovered that power resists pressure. Vogue didn't make noise, it didn't need to. It elevated one figure and quietly stepped away from another. And in elite circles, that tells you everything you need to know. Because influence doesn't disappear overnight, it migrates, it settles where it feels protected, and right now, it's clear where it has chosen to stay. This isn't a conclusion, it's a pause. The real question is who will recognize the lesson before the next opportunity fades just as quietly.